Allow me to introduce Dr. Jill Stein. Let's see. And it's okay, I'll stand up. If that's
Okay,
right.
no, that is fine.
Okay, because it's time for all of us to stand up. Politically, socially, spiritually, in all ways. As Greens, we've been ahead of the curve for many years, for decades, as a party for people, planet, and peace over profit, as a party of a sustainable and just economy, of green energy, of nonviolent conflict resolution, of equal rights for the LGBT community, of workers' rights. And on all these fronts, we've been ahead of the curve, and the curve is catching up to us. So I want to just start by giving a big thank you to all of you for helping to bring us to this very exciting, historic moment that we're in right now. And a big shout out for the Texas Green Party that has been just doing amazing work to create this, this big boat for us to sail forward on as the lifeboat that we need as the Titanic begins to go down. So a big thank you to all of you for bringing us here. So this is a very exciting day in a very exciting week, which has really been the launch of our exploratory campaign. And you know, I'm coming off of these incredible couple of days where we've just begun to talk with people. And an exploratory campaign basically means that you are, quote, testing the water. It allows you to sort of begin a dialogue without launching the complete foundation of a presidential campaign, with all the staff, with all the fundraising, with all the policy positions in place. It's a way to sort of safely start up and not be held, you know, accountable for all those things you have to do once you say you're running for office. And what's really interesting is that for us to run an exploratory campaign means that we go to the workers, the oil workers who are on strike for decent, safe working conditions, for conditions to minimize the risks to the communities. It means we go to the border towns, where I'll be going day after tomorrow. I'll be going to Laredo to speak with the people there who are supporting the immigrants and the struggle in the border town for justice for immigrants and for justice to the residents on both sides of that border who are dealing with the devastation of a militarized border, which is like sort of living under occupation. It means going to Denton, Texas, where you know, where Texas amazingly has passed a ban on fracking right there in the heart of the oil empire. It means spending some time today with Juan Parras and Tejas, the Texas Environmental Justice Advocacy Services, which is, you know, a wonderful group that's standing up for the rights of the communities living sandwiched in between these gigantic storage tanks and the refineries and the automobile graveyard, really, where all this asbestos is being released. They're living really in an incredible toxic wasteland, and whose fight is really a, you know, it's like a poster child of the fight that we all have for clean air and clean water. To paraphrase Martin Luther King, a threat to environmental justice anywhere is a threat to environmental justice everywhere. And it's the purpose of our campaign is to lift up these communities, to lift up their struggle, to lift up their voices, and really provide a campaign whose purpose is to get this message out, because this really is the struggle of the American people, a struggle for wages, a struggle for job security, a struggle for health care we can afford, a struggle for clean air and water, a struggle for the rights of immigrants who are really in the target hairs, who've come here fleeing criminal foreign policy, where we have undertaken coups, where we have undermined legitimate, democratically elected governments in South America and Central America, have really created chaos also through the NAFTA and these corporate trade agreements that provide infinite income and infinite profits and infinite power to multinational corporations, but which have no accountability to people anywhere. They become a sort of supranational governmental structure that has no element of democracy to it whatsoever. And it's, you know, it's those trade agreements that have been so devastating to the economies of South America. That's why there's been this incredible migration of immigrants to this society, as we have displaced, for example, millions of farm workers by dumping cheap U.S. Agricultural goods in Latin America. So, you know, the heart of the immigration crisis really is a U.S. foreign policy that has lost its ethical, its moral, its humanitarian basis. So we are here to lift up these struggles that everyday people are grappling with, because politics has become sort of the playground of corporate America and of billionaires and millionaires, you know, like Sheldon Adelson, who poured well over $100 million into the last campaign, like 130 million, something like that, of the traceable money, and potentially much more than that, where you have single billionaires who create their own campaigns. And this is the way the whole system works. There are Republican funders and there are Democratic Party funders, but both of them have enormous deep pockets in the hands of very few individuals who are calling the shots in their political campaigns. So when Democrats and Republicans run an exploratory campaign, you know what it means. It means exploring, you know, who can grab the funders. That's what the big to-do was about, you know. All the press was, you know, focused on the big news of whether Mitt Romney was or was not going to run, and what did that mean? Whether he was going to tie up his funders or whether his funders would be fair game for others. That's what an exploratory campaign is for the Democratic and Republican parties. For us, an exploratory campaign means going to the communities and saying, can we be of service to you? Can this campaign have meaning? Can it be a megaphone by which we lift up your voices and force them into political dialogue, which will otherwise ignore them, so that our frontline communities move to the front lines of the presidential race. Our struggles as frontline communities, as workers, as people struggling for health care, as the Black Lives Matter movement, trying to, you know, simply be safe to walk down the street, or to exercise our democratic rights of protest, or to survive in a, you know, in the incarceration security state that we've become. Those issues are being locked out, and we're saying, can we lift up these struggles and bring them to the forefront, to the front lines of presidential dialogue? So that's what we're doing, and it has been incredibly exciting, I must say, to just be out there over the course of this last week. When we launched, which was actually 2 weeks ago at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., you know, we thought we would do it. We thought we would make as big a deal out of this launch as we possibly could, in order to challenge the mythology that there is only a Democrat and a Republican and that resistance is futile. You know, and we saw what that meant in 2014, right? Where people voted with their feet by deciding not to come out. And we saw the historic Democratic Party constituencies just not show. So in particular, the Latino vote was down, the women's vote was down, the workers' vote was down. The communities that had been sort of the rock solid support of the Democratic Party did not come out. And what happened in 2014 was really not a victory for Republicans. It was actually a defeat for Democrats. Because if you look at what the numbers were, what happened was that Democrats just didn't show. It was a record low turnout, the lowest since the Second World War, when people had a very good reason not to come out because they were busy, you know, fighting a war in Europe. That was why that was a low turnout election. Ours was a low turnout election because people had nothing to vote for. They had things to vote against, but nothing to vote for. And just to put some of the numbers behind that, recent polls show that 58% of the American public is now calling for a third major party. So, you know, it's not like we are the lunatic fringe somehow. You know, this is what people are calling for. And when polls ask people how they feel about Democratic and Republican parties, majorities disapprove of both parties. Something like 51% disapproval of Democrats and a 55% disapproval of Republicans. And it's only 25% of the public that actually identifies as Republicans. And it's 31%, you know, less than 1 out of 3 that identifies themselves as Democrats. And yet we hear so much from them, and we hear such a loud megaphone from the likes of Fox News and, you know, the Rush Limbaughs and the mouthpieces of ultra mean-spirited conservatism. You get the sense that this is the way the American public feels. But that just happens to be where the money is for these, you know, massive advertising campaigns. Most Americans, you know, really feel a sense of community, a sense of family, you know, a sense of social responsibility. We have a sense of individual responsibility. We're responsible for ourselves, but we're also responsible for each other. No society has ever survived that doesn't have kind of a basic core of humanitarian values. The basic values of do unto others, you know, as you would have them do unto you. These are just basic, common sense, decent values that don't belong to any one, you know, religious or ethical or ethnic group. This is just a basic sense of decency and community and respect that is very alive and well out there. And again, if you look at polls, they show that the vast majority of people feel that immigrants deserve a respectful path to citizenship. The majority feels that we have a right to a job, that if the private sector cannot provide decent work, that it is a responsibility of government to ensure that people have decent work, that we deserve decent wages, we deserve living wages and a raise in the minimum wage, we deserve health care as a human right, we deserve for a basic sense of racial justice, and to end this police violence, the police militarization, and the incarceration state that has come to hold 1 out of every 3 African American men hostage by this massive prison system, which is extremely destructive. It does not benefit the cause of justice or the cause of safety in our communities. You know, and in terms of foreign policy, you know, we now have a foreign policy which is, shall we say, trigger happy, to say the least. And it really, its goal is that of global economic and military domination. Our goal should be international law, human rights, and a state of diplomacy. We need to live as members of one small world community because it becomes smaller and smaller all the time. And that doesn't mean, you know, we sit down and we befriend ISIS. By no means. It means that we don't have to bomb the beast. Because by bombing the beast, guess what we create? More ISISes, and the next ISIS. And we've been in this cycle of accelerating violence for the past many decades. Notably, you know, starting with Osama bin Laden, whom we trained in the process of mobilizing a war effort against the Soviet Union that was occupying Afghanistan. So this policy has a very lousy track record. You know, what exactly are we going to do in the third invasion of Iraq that we didn't do in the second invasion of Iraq? What other resources are we going to mobilize that are going to enable us to win this time around? How many more trillions of dollars are we going to pour into this? How many more lives are we going to obliterate, especially not only American lives, but lives in the Middle East? This does not win us friends and brownie points in the world community. If anything, you know, it has just made us the pariah of the world community. And we can show that. There are studies that show that, where we've gone in with the drones, which are essentially indiscriminate bombing. Where we've done that, we have poisoned the waters, and we have turned a public opinion against the United States and against America and against the causes that we purport to support. And we've created very strong anti-American sentiment. We have ushered in the development of terrorist local groups and the expansion of Al-Qaeda or ISIS or the rest. This is not a winning policy. This is a losing, failed policy. Let's not do it again. And then just quickly I'll say, we have a very positive vision to share. A vision that's very timely and very essential. And the good news is this: by creating jobs right now, putting people not only back to work, because the unemployment numbers are very misleading. They neglect, they neglect about an equal number of people. You know, the unemployment rate is what? It's like 5.7 now, something like that. There are an equal number of people who are underemployed, who are working lousy, part-time, low-wage, insecure, and temporary jobs because there are no other jobs to find. And in fact, the record shows that 75% of the jobs that have been created since the so-called recovery in 2008, 75% of all these jobs that have been brought online are low-wage, insecure, and temporary jobs. That's what's coming back. That is what's, you know, this is the economy we've been engineered into, and it totally doesn't work. So we still have an enormous, and then there are people who are not continuing to look for work, so-called discouraged workers, and they are not counted by the unemployment rate either. So if you were to count them, the unemployment rate is not 5.6 or 5.7. It's more like 11 or 12%. And in some communities, in the African American community in particular, among youth, it's sky high. I don't know about you, but it seems just about all the young people I know nowadays, if they're working 2 jobs at Walmart and at McDonald's, trying to repay their student loans, and they're living with their parents if they possibly can, or they're living in very crowded group situations. You know, it's really terrible what they're facing. So we have a really unresolved problem here, and we can fix all these problems really in one fell swoop. You know, not entirely, but enough to make a transformative difference, and enough to sort of change course here from a continuing downhill spiral to a series of sort of a virtuous cycle, a virtuous series of virtuous solutions. Welcome, come right on in. A number of solutions that breed more solutions. And I'll just describe briefly what that is. We've called that the Green New Deal in our earlier campaigns, and many of the state Green parties talk about this as well. It's essentially an emergency jobs program that puts people back to work in living wage jobs that at the same time creates an emergency transition to a green economy based on clean, renewable energy, wind, water, and sun, and energy conservation, so that we're not poisoning our workers, we're not poisoning our communities, and we're not ruining the climate and creating permanent drought and crazy weather. I just came from 7 feet of snow in New England. It's crazy all over the place. California has a permanent drought. I'm not sure how bad it is down here in Texas now, but
we're having cold weather.
In West Texas, yes, right. And much of the U.S. is anchored in this permanent drought right now, and so we need to fix this. And by transitioning on an urgent basis, and we say by 2030, we can do that. We need to put ourselves on a wartime footing, like as if we were just bombed in Pearl Harbor, because we were able to transform the economy into a wartime footing within a year or two. In fact, I dare say it was probably more like a year that we became a war economy. Unfortunately, we're still a war economy, and this is not good for us. It's not good for the world either, and it provides the weapons industry far too much influence over our elected misleaders. They're not leaders, they are misleaders. And this, it just drives the vicious cycle of what is ailing us. So this Green New Deal provides the jobs, it creates an emergency transition to a green economy, it makes wars for oil, guess what, obsolete. So we no longer have a rationale or an excuse to be going into Iraq again. When did ISIS become the bad guy? ISIS, we were actually either directly or indirectly supporting ISIS as one of the groups that was fighting Assad in Syria. When did ISIS become the bad guy? And ISIS is, has always been, a horrific, treacherous organization, as most of these groups are that we are supporting in order to fight Assad. ISIS became the bad guy when they began to go after the oil fields in Iraq. Then that's when suddenly the big public relations campaign started against ISIS. So at any rate, those kinds of wars and these kinds of fights would become obsolete. And we wouldn't need to fight them, and we wouldn't need to pour $1 trillion a year into this military-industrial security complex. Instead, we have that money to put into our schools, into secure retirement, into the conversion to clean, renewable energy, and so on. And then finally, I would add that this program of a Green New Deal, it also pays for itself, if you can get this, in health care benefits. Why is that? Right now, we pay an incredible price in our health, in asthma. Any asthmatics out there? Yeah, or asthma in your family? It's all over the place. Heart disease, air pollution is a major offender of heart disease, stroke, even tied to diabetes, probably tied to Alzheimer's disease and attention deficit and all sorts of neurologic dysfunction. Air pollution and other forms of pollution associated with fossil fuels, including mercury pollution, for example. Mercury, which is in our fish supply now, which comes largely out of coal plants. So, fossil fuels have an incredible toxic legacy, and when we convert to clean, renewable energy, our health gets so much better so quickly that that alone pays for the costs of converting to clean, renewable energy. It's absolutely astounding how this stuff pays for itself just by allowing us to get better. What we have is not a healthcare system. What we actually have is a sick care system that's very busy trying to minimize the damage that we do to ourselves through fossil fuel pollution and also through the corporate industrialized food system, which is also a major, major offender of our health. And I should quickly just describe the proof of this. There was a real world experiment that demonstrated how very powerful a green economy is for reclaiming our health. And I'm going to describe what happened in Cuba. And Cuba has a very good healthcare system. And Cuba's healthcare system didn't change. So this wasn't related to anything having to do with Cuba's healthcare system. But in the early 1990s, when the Soviet Union collapsed, suddenly Cuba no longer received support, and particularly it didn't receive oil or the money to buy oil. So overnight, Cuba had to convert to a green energy economy and a green food economy and a green transportation economy. What did that mean? It meant getting out the draft animals, the workhorses. A lot of people went to work in organic farms. Why organic? Because they couldn't afford fertilizers and pesticides. They had no choice. Cuba didn't want to do it. Cuba had to do it. So suddenly they had an organic food system, which meant it wasn't entirely plant-based, but it was largely plant-based. So instead of eating fatty meat 3 times a day or 2 times a day, it became more like once a week. And they began eating lots more fresh fruits and vegetables, which is what you do in an organic food system and a fresh, local, sustainable food system. It meant they rode their bikes and they walked places and they moved around in buses. But their air pollution quota, just went south very quickly. They just didn't have any fuel to burn, so the air got really clean. And they didn't have the chemical and pollution exposures. And then they were also doing active transportation. So you had all these things happening at once, all related to the fossil fuel economy. Meanwhile, their economy, of course, was crashing because they didn't have the support that they used to have. So you would have thought that you'd see their health really deteriorate because everybody's really stressed out and struggling with economic hard times. But do you know what actually happened? And mind you, this cost them $0. They didn't have any money to spend on this. We spend, you know how much we spend every year now? Not $1 trillion, not $2 trillion, $3 trillion a year is what we spend on sick care, not on health care, on sick care, because we're making ourselves sick. So spending $0, the death rate from diabetes was cut in half. The death rate from heart disease was cut by 35%, and the death rate from strokes was cut, I think it was 20%, and the overall death rate was cut by 18%. So they had this health revolution, spending $0 simply by transitioning to a clean energy, green food economy. So again, it tells you what's waiting for us, this incredible win-win solution. We don't have to go down the tubes with climate change. We don't have to be embroiled in these failed, endless, ever-expanding wars for oil and resources. We don't have to go broke and get sick. by a sick economy and a sick energy and food system. We can actually turn this around and we can put people back to work and jumpstart the economy at the same time in one fell swoop by basically declaring, a war on climate change and doing what we need to do to expedite that change. So, two other things I should add real quick. We can move to a Medicare for all healthcare system and do it now. Even Medicare is being sliced and diced and is on its way to becoming a benefit under attack, essentially, and you have to qualify by showing some degree of need, and the minute you do that, it's going to be a poor people's program that comes under attack. Social Security, likewise, is under attack. We can have Medicare for all right now and save about, whatever it is, $100 million a year, more than enough to pay for complete health care for everyone, including mental health care, including dental care, including eye care, including, hearing aids if you need hearing aids. There are just all these holes in health care right now that people are falling through, by the droves, and it doesn't need to be that way. Medicare for all pays for it, and in fact saves us money simply by removing the profiteering and by streamlining this massive, wasteful private health insurance bureaucracy that is gobbling up to 30% of every healthcare dollar. We need to spend our healthcare dollars on healthcare, not have them preyed upon by predatory insurance policies and pharmaceutical companies. If we're doing that, and if we have elected officials who are actually working for us and not working for the pharmaceutical and insurance companies, that we can do this. And then finally, we need to, start massive changes to our prison system, which has become, a racial prison camp, really, where people of color, particularly African Americans, are massively overrepresented. We need to end the war on drugs, which has been essentially a war on poor people and communities of color. And in doing so, we can treat drug problems as public health problems. That's how you effectively treat them. You don't treat them by throwing people in jail. And we can also treat them by creating jobs, creating hope, creating engagement for young people. Those are the programs that actually work to prevent gang violence, to prevent drug abuse, and so on. So these solutions all feed back on each other by ensuring that people are employed in good, well-paying jobs. We can essentially take on all of these challenges. And the last thing is that it's time to end the debt crisis for the younger generation. No society has ever survived by exploiting and devouring its younger generation. But that's what's being done right now in the student debt crisis, in the education crisis. We need to provide higher education as a human right. Like we've provided high school education because it was a necessity in the 20th century. Well, nowadays, a college education is an economic necessity in the 21st century. So by analogy, we need to provide it. We also know from the studies of the GI Bill, which provided free higher education to returning soldiers after the Second World War, we know that for every dollar that was spent, we recouped $7 in public benefits and in tax revenues through improved earnings and so on. So all of these programs pay for themselves. There is a different way forward, a way which is just, a way which is sustainable, a way which delivers the future that we and our children deserve. And we are going to stand up and insist that we are going to have that future, and we are going to occupy the political vacuum that exists right now. We're at an incredibly magical moment where the public is clamoring for a principled and credible alternative. And thanks to the hard work that so many of you have been doing. We've been able to lay the groundwork for this campaign. It's the most exciting time imaginable to be launching it. We're in exploratory mode now, which means we need to hear from you. Go to our website, which is jill2016.com. Tell your friends about it. One of the most exciting things right now in this race, and one of the reasons that I decided, you know, and our team really decided to jump in now, is that we have web tools. We have digital tools now that enable us to organize digitally. This is the revolution that Howard Dean began that made him a contender. It's the revolution that Barack Obama extended when he developed tools for organizing very cost effectively. We've never been able to have these tools before, but we are very lucky that a web developer who was part of that team decided he had had it working for Democrats and wasn't going to do it anymore.
Finally saw the light.
Yes, right. A lot of these, you know, sort of web geniuses, you know, got involved in politics as young kids, and they went for the Democratic Party thinking that it was these were the good guys. Well, after a couple cycles of presidential campaigns now, they are beginning to see the light, like everyday people are, you know. Last election, loads of people were still very intimidated by this idea that you had to vote your fear and not vote your moral compass, your ethical compass about the kind of society we want to be. They were very busy casting a defensive vote for what they thought was the lesser of two very lousy choices that were essentially working for Wall Street and working for big multinational corporations. There were a lot of reluctant voters out there who were voting out of fear. And I think at this point, people have been beat up enough by the consequences of those votes of fear, you know, that you know, we're at a very exciting point on the learning curve right now. And what we've been trying to communicate to people for a while is that it's time to replace the politics of fear with the politics of courage to actually stand up, because the politics of fear delivers everything you're afraid of. We have to be the drivers of our democracy. We have to set the agenda. If we buy into this fear and silence, then you know, then what we get really is the consequences of fear and silence. You know, we allow the predatory bullies, the political bullies out there, to take over and run the show. So us everyday people are beginning to stand up. We are standing up in our communities. And in the words of Alice Walker, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. We have it when we start getting together across the issues of justice, across the issues of workers' rights, to good wages, to the right of union representation, to living wages, to safe workplaces, the rights of our communities to safe workplaces and safety from militarized police and militarized borders, our right to a healthcare system, to health as a human right and education as a human right. There are so many of us, 1 out of every 2 Americans now is either in poverty or low income, heading for poverty. That's according to the Census Bureau. So there are a lot of struggling people out there who are saying, you know, we need to start looking at who it is that's inflicting these devastating policies on us and not allow ourselves to be turned on each other, which is what they try to do. They try to get us fighting each other, communities of color fighting against immigrants, fighting against workers, fighting against environmental and climate justice advocates. They want us to fight each other instead of working together for a world that works for all of us, that says no to the billionaires. There are 80 billionaires right now who single-handedly, 80 people who have a wealth equivalent to half of the world's population. That's just not fair. You can't do it like that. Here's another statistic for you. If you take 100 people representing the world population and 100 loaves of bread, here's how it's distributed. In fact, I think this is a U.S. statistic and not a global statistic. I need to check that, but I'm pretty sure it's U.S. The richest one person among 100 has 50 loaves of bread.
No.
The poorest 50 people in that room have 1 loaf of bread. That's how our resources and wealth are being distributed right now, and that's not okay. You know, we live on a finite planet, and we need to ensure that it's working for all of us. Right now, it's working for, you know, for the economic elite and their political buddies who are their handmaidens. So the minute we get together, we have the, we've got the numbers, we've got the solutions, we have the moral authority to stand up and say, this is what our basic values are. We as a society are going to engage our democracy and change our direction forward. So the movements are alive and well in our communities, and we need to take those movements into the voting booth and exercise our democracy, stand up and stand together, and there will be no going back the minute we do that. So this is a welcome to everybody to become a part of this effort to support our local Green Party as the continuing part of this effort, and to check out our campaign at jill2016.com, and we can turn this breaking point that we face into the tipping point that we need to take back the peaceful, just, green future that is within our reach. Thank you all so very much.